Welcome to Wildlife for Sleep, a place where ancient oceans breathe slowly, where shadows drift beneath the waves, and where stories are told, not to awaken the mind but to gently quiet it if these facts help you relax or slowly drift into sleep. Please like the video, subscribe to Wildlife for Sleep, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps this channel continue creating peaceful, slow science-inspired sleep documentaries. Now settle into a comfortable position, let your breathing soften, and allow the surface world to fade away. Tonight we descend into the deepest waters of the sea. The leafy sea dragon, Phycojuris equus, emerges from the pages of evolutionary history as one of the ocean's most exquisite illusions. A creature whose very form challenges the boundary between animal and plant, between predator and prey, and between survival and spectacle. This full-life science documentary, structured chapter by chapter, aims to unfold the complete narrative of its existence, from ancient origins to contemporary fragility. Each chapter approximately 4,000 words in conceptual depth, though rendered here in flowing, contemplative prose that invites long pauses, reflection, and immersion. The total arc spanning 10 chapters, 40,000 words, a patient exploration of a being that itself embodies patience. The story begins not in the water, but on land. In the mid-19th century, when European naturalists first encountered specimens washed ashore or collected by explorers along Australia's southern coasts, the year 1865 marks a pivotal moment when Albert Gunther, a German-born zoologist at the British Museum, formally described the species in the catalogue of the fishes in the British Museum, assigning it the binomial Phycojuris equus, the genus name Phycojuris deriving from Greek roots phyco for seaweed, and duris meaning tough or enduring, evoking the resilient, algae-mimicking body, while equus, Latin for horseman or knight, perhaps alludes to the upright posture reminiscent of seahorses, or the armored, dragon-like appearance that would later inspire its common name. Before Gunther's formal taxonomy, local indigenous knowledge of southern Australia's coastal peoples, the Ngarrindjeri, Koina, and Murning among others, likely included awareness of these drifting forms, though oral traditions rarely distinguish them sharply from the broader category of sea creatures resembling floating weeds. European whalers, sealers, and early settlers occasionally noted strange, leafy objects in nets or on beaches, mistaking them for detached kelp fronds until closer inspection revealed eyes, fins, and subtle movement. These early encounters fueled curiosity, but it was the Victorian-era fascination with natural curiosities, cabinets of wonder, and the emerging science of ichthyology that propelled the leafy sea dragon into scientific consciousness. The common name, leafy sea dragon, or simply leafy, crystallized later, distinguishing it from its plainer cousin, the weedy or common sea dragon Philopteryx teniolatus, described decades earlier. The leafy descriptor perfectly captures the profusion of dermal outgrowths, thin, translucent, irregularly lobed appendages that cascade from the head, neck, back, and along the sides, each one a living extension of skin, vascularized, capable of slight color adjustment, yet non-functional for locomotion. These structures, numbering sometimes over 20 prominent ones, plus countless smaller filaments, transform the fish into a floating fragment of Eclonia radiata or Macrocystis pyrifera, the dominant kelps of the Great Southern Reef. Early illustrators, working from preserved specimens, struggled to convey the delicacy. The way light filters through the lobes, creating an ethereal, almost ghostly translucence. Lithographs from the late 1800s often exaggerated the spines, portraying a more fearsome dragon, while photographs, emerging in the 20th century, finally captured the serene, drifting reality. Taxonomic placement within Cygnethidae, the pipefish and seahorse family, was immediate and undisputed. Shared traits include the elongated, tubular snout, fused jaws, absent pelvic fins, bony armor of dermal plates arranged in rings, and the extraordinary reproductive strategy of male parental care. Yet Phycojuris stands monotypic, the only member of its genus, underscoring its morphological divergence. Molecular phylogenies later confirmed deep separation from Philopteryx, with estimates placing the split millions of years ago. During periods of fluctuating sea levels and shifting coastlines. The naming process itself reflects colonial science's priorities, crediting European describers, while the animal's indigenous cultural significance, if any specific, remains underdocumented. Today, the leafy sea dragon bears additional honorifics. Glauert's sea dragon, after early 20th century collector L. Glauert, though Gunther's original holds primacy. Public fascination grew slowly. Aquaria in the early 20th century struggled with husbandry. The delicate metabolism, specific temperature range, and need for live mysid prey proving challenging. It was not until the mid-20th century, with advances in filtration, lighting, and captive breeding of food organisms, that leafies appeared in public displays. Institutions like the Adelaide Aquarium, later others in Sydney, Melbourne, and internationally, brought them to wider audiences. Photographs in National Geographic, documentaries narrated in reverent tones, cemented their status as icons of marine wonder. The species became South Australia's official marine emblem in 2001, a symbol of temperate biodiversity, featured on logo stamps and tourism campaigns. Yet this celebrity status carries double-edged consequences, heightening awareness, while historically fueling illegal collection. The discovery phase, therefore, spans centuries, from indigenous observation through scientific formalization to global recognition, each layer adding to the understanding, yet revealing how much remains unseen. The leafy sea dragon, named and classified, still drifts largely unnoticed in its native waters, waiting for deeper inquiry. No other fish so thoroughly embodies crypsis, the art of blending into the background, as the leafy sea dragon. Its morphology, a symphony of deceptive detail, begins with overall body plan. Adults typically reach 30 to 45 centimeters in length, though exceptional specimens approach 50, slender, almost serpentine, yet rigid due to the encasing armor. This armor comprises about 40 trunk rings and 40 tail rings, bony plates overlapping in precise, geometric fashion, each plate bearing small, sharp spines, particularly prominent laterally, providing passive defense. The rings give the body a segmented, almost articulated appearance, reminiscent of medieval chainmail, yet infinitely more delicate. The head, elongated and equine, supports independently swiveling eyes, positioned laterally, granting near 360-degree vision, crucial for spotting prey and predators in a visually cluttered environment. The snout, tubular, toothless, ends in a minute mouth, capable of explosive suction, drawing in water and prey with pinpoint accuracy. No teeth, no chewing. Digestion occurs in a simple gut, reflecting a diet of tiny, soft-bodied organisms. The hallmark, the leafy appendages, protrude from nearly every surface, largest along the back, neck, and head, smaller ones fringing the snout, pectoral region, and tail. These are integumentary outgrowths, extensions of skin supported by dermal connective tissue, richly vascularized, allowing limited color change, from yellowish green to olive brown, sometimes with iridescent flashes, matching ambient light and algal hues. They undulate passively with water movement, enhancing the illusion. Studies of appendage microstructure reveal collagen fibers arranged to scatter light, mimicking algal translucence, while pigment cells, chromatophores, and iridophores enable subtle shifts. Though far slower than cephalopod camouflage, propulsion relies on diminutive fins, pectoral fins, fan-shaped, located behind the head, beat rapidly, at 25 to 30 times per second, creating gentle thrust, almost invisible due to transparency. The dorsal fin, small, positioned midway along the back, aids steering. No caudal fin. The tail, long, straight, non-prehensile, trails behind, adding to the drifting seaweed profile. Swimming is inefficient, energy-conserving, suited to a low metabolism life, where bursts of speed are rare, needed only for minor repositioning. Coloration varies geographically. Individuals in kelp-heavy South Australia often greener, while those in sandier Western Australian sites lean browner. Juveniles possess nascent lobes, already mimicking miniature adults, though less profuse. The entire form, from armored rings to leafy profusion, represents convergent evolution toward maximal crypsis, paralleling other masters like the sargassum frogfish or decorator crabs, yet achieved through entirely different anatomical pathways. Internally, the skeletal support for appendages, vascular networks, and muscular control of fins reveal exquisite fine-tuning, every detail tuned to one purpose: to disappear, to become part of the swaying forest. The leafy sea dragon's body, therefore, is not merely anatomy. It is strategy, written in flesh, bone, and skin. The leafy sea dragon does not inhabit just any stretch of ocean. It is tethered to one of the planet's most distinctive yet under-celebrated marine ecosystems, the Great Southern Reef, an almost continuous arc of temperate rocky coastline and kelp forest that sweeps for more than 8,000 kilometers along the southern edge of the Australian continent. From the cool, current-swept waters off Tasmania, westward through Victoria, South Australia, and into Western Australia as far north as Shark Bay, this vast reef system, larger in area than the Great Barrier Reef, though far less publicized, owes its richness to the Leeuwin Current, a narrow, warm poleward flow that originates in the tropics, mixes with colder, nutrient-laden waters from the Southern Ocean, and delivers pulses of productivity to otherwise oligotrophic temperate seas within this grand seascape. The leafy sea dragon finds its narrow niche, a creature of moderate depths, sheltered embayments, and macroalgal abundance. Preferred habitats center on rocky reefs interspersed with patches of coarse sand, where kelp forests of Eclonia radiata, the golden kelp, form dense canopies at depths between 3 and 25 meters. These forests, punctuated by understory algae, seagrass meadows of Posidonia and Amphiboles, and occasional floating wrack, create a structurally complex environment ideal for crypsis. The leafy sea dragon drifts in the mid-water column, just below the canopy, where dappled sunlight filters through blades, casting moving shadows that the animal's leafy appendages mimic perfectly. It avoids open sand expanses, where camouflage fails, and rarely ventures below 35 to 40 meters, where kelp thins and light dims, though occasional records exist deeper, likely transients carried by downwelling currents. Geographic distribution remains remarkably restricted, endemic exclusively to southern and southwestern Australia. The range spans from approximately 28 degrees S near Jurien Bay in Western Australia, eastward along the continental shelf to Wilson's Promontory at the southeastern tip of Victoria, with the densest populations historically documented in South Australia, particularly around Encounter Bay, Kangaroo Island, the Fleurieu Peninsula, and the Upper Spencer Gulf. Isolated pockets persist along the Victorian coast, near Port Phillip Bay, and in sheltered Tasmanian inlets, though numbers decline sharply toward the eastern and northern limits. Genetic studies, using mitochondrial DNA and microsatellites, later expanded with thousands of single nucleotide polymorphisms, reveal clear population structure, at least 3 to 4 distinct management units, a western cluster in cooler, high-wave energy zones of South and Western Australia, a central cluster in the Great Australian Bight, and a smaller, more isolated eastern group. Gene flow between these units appears minimal, constrained by the species' poor swimming capacity, lack of a dispersive larval stage, and strong phyllometry to natal sites. Within these broader clusters, microhabitat selection is precise. Individuals favor sites with moderate water movement, where tidal currents and gentle swell carry mysid swarms, the primary prey, into pockets and crevices. Too much surge, and the delicate leafy appendages risk tearing. Too little flow, and prey densities drop. Water temperature exerts strong influence. Optimal range lies between 13 and 19 degrees Celsius, with thermal performance curves peaking around 16 to 18 degrees. Above 22 degrees, metabolic stress rises sharply, feeding efficiency plummets, and survival declines. This narrow tolerance explains vulnerability to marine heat waves, which have already caused localized kelp canopy loss in the eastern Great Australian Bight, pushing warm-tolerant competitors southward while compressing suitable habitat for leafies. Seasonal patterns overlay spatial distribution. In winter, when water cools and nutrient upwelling strengthens, kelp growth accelerates, prey biomass increases, and leafies concentrate in shallower, more sheltered areas. Summer brings warmer surface waters, occasional stratification, and dispersal into slightly deeper zones. Though core home ranges rarely exceed a few hundred meters in diameter, acoustic tracking studies, using small ultrasonic tags, have documented surprisingly greater mobility than once assumed. Some individuals travel up to 1 kilometer over weeks, yet return repeatedly to favored boulders or kelp patches, suggesting spatial memory, perhaps guided by olfactory cues from conspecifics or learned landmarks. Site fidelity strengthens during breeding periods, with males selecting stable positions for egg brooding, females returning to the same vicinity year after year. Threats to habitat integrity accumulate relentlessly. Coastal urbanization, port expansions, dredging for shipping channels, and aquaculture leases introduce sedimentation, nutrient enrichment, and physical disturbance. Agricultural runoff from the Murray-Darling Basin, though diminished in recent dry decades, historically delivered pulses of turbidity and pesticides into the Coorong and adjacent gulfs. Kelp forest decline, driven by climate-amplified factors, poses the gravest long-term risk. Prolonged marine heat waves, like those in 2010, 2011, and 2015-2016, triggered widespread Eclonia mortality, replaced in some areas by turf algae or urchin barrens. Invasive long-spined sea urchins Centrostephanus rajacea, expanding from Tasmania, graze voraciously, converting productive kelp to bare rock, while range-shifting herbivores, such as the purple sea urchin, compound grazing pressure. Protected areas offer partial refuge. Marine parks in South Australia, including the Encounter Bay, Upper Spencer Gulf, and Investigator Group marine parks, encompass significant leafy habitat. Western Australia's Ungari Capes and Great Southern Reef Marine Park provide additional coverage. Yet enforcement remains challenging. Poaching, though reduced, persists in unprotected zones. Citizen science programs, notably the Leafy Sea Dragon Monitoring Project and Reef Life Survey, rely on volunteer divers to log sightings, photograph individuals, and note behavioral states. These data, aggregated over decades, reveal gradual declines in some monitoring sites, stability in others, and occasional local extirpations. The leafy sea dragon, therefore, exists within a shrinking mosaic, a species whose distribution, once seemingly secure, now maps the frontiers of temperate reef resilience. The leafy sea dragon lives a life defined by economy. Every movement, every pause calibrated to conserve energy while maximizing deception and feeding success. Its daily rhythm follows no rigid clock, but responds to light, tide, and prey availability, dawn and dusk periods. When light levels soften and mysid shrimp swarm most densely, see heightened activity. The animal positions itself in current lanes, pectoral fins fluttering at 30 beats per second, maintaining station against drift, eyes scanning independently, tracking tiny prey items against the background of swaying kelp. When a target aligns, the tubular snout snaps forward, operculum flares, and suction draws water and organism inward. Capture success high for items within a few centimeters. Yet each strike expends minimal energy. The process repeated hundreds, perhaps thousands, of times daily, between feeding bouts. Long periods of apparent inactivity prevail. The sea dragon hangs nearly motionless, leafy appendages undulating passively, mimicking detached algal fronds. This crypsis serves dual purposes: predator avoidance and ambush hunting. Larger fish, rays, seals, and even seabirds occasionally patrol the kelp. Yet the leafy's outline dissolves so completely that most glide past unaware. When disturbance occurs, response is minimal: a slow, graceful turn, or drift to denser cover. Rapid escape bursts almost never observed. The armored body, tough skin, and unpalatable appearance deter most attacks. Juveniles face greater risk. Their smaller size, less developed lobes, making them vulnerable to wrasse, leather jackets, and other small predators. Social behavior remains sparse outside breeding. Adults are solitary, encountering one another rarely, and without overt aggression. Occasional pair-like associations form briefly, perhaps during non-reproductive periods, but dissolve quickly. No evidence of schooling, territoriality, or complex hierarchies. Communication, if it occurs, likely relies on visual cues, subtle body tilting, appendage positioning, or color intensification. Chemical signaling appears reduced, consistent with the diminished olfactory genome. Nocturnal behavior shifts toward rest. Individuals settle closer to the substrate, often among branching algae or near boulders, fins folded, body angled slightly upward, conserving energy as metabolism slows. Some observations suggest crepuscular peaks, with activity tapering after dark. Yet individuals remain alert, capable of opportunistic feeding even at night when bioluminescent prey or moonlight aids visibility. Locomotion, though inefficient, achieves remarkable precision. Pectoral fins provide primary thrust. Dorsal fin steers, tail acts as rudder. The entire motion silent, low amplitude, allowing the animal to reposition without betraying its presence. In strong currents, it may anchor subtly against kelp stipes, though never grasping. The tail lacks prehensile ability. Unlike some pipefishes, this limitation reinforces dependence on intact algal structure. Where disruption occurs, leafies struggle to maintain position. The behavioral repertoire, therefore, centers on patience, economy, and invisibility. A life of slow drifts, precise strikes, and long silences, perfectly matched to an environment where haste invites detection and stillness rewards survival. In the realm of reproductive biology, few phenomena captivate as profoundly as the male pregnancy exhibited by cyngnathids. And within this family, the leafy sea dragon exemplifies a particularly exposed and elaborate variant. Breeding commences as water temperatures climb toward their annual peak, typically late spring through early summer, in the southern hemisphere's October to February window, when kelp forests teem with planktonic abundance, providing ample resources for both adults and impending offspring. Sexual dimorphism is subtle, males slightly smaller, with a broader, more vascularized tail underside, females often displaying a deeper abdomen when gravid. Maturity arrives around 2 years, at sizes of 25 to 30 centimeters. Though environmental factors like food availability and temperature can accelerate or delay this milestone, courtship unfolds with ritualistic grace. Potential mates, having encountered one another in shared foraging grounds, initiate a synchronized dance, circling slowly, bodies aligned parallel, leafy appendages swaying in unison with the current, colors intensify, yellow-greens shifting to brighter hues, perhaps signaling health and receptivity. This mirroring behavior, lasting minutes to hours, builds trust, reducing the risk of mismatched pairings. No overt aggression, no chases, just a patient, mutual assessment. Olfactory cues may play a minor role, but visual harmony dominates. Once aligned, the pair rises slightly in the water column, the female arching her body, ovipositor extending, the male positioning his tail beneath her. Egg transfer marks the climax. The female deposits up to 250 to 300 eggs, each around 1 millimeter in diameter, bright pink-orange when first laid, onto the male's brood patch, a specialized, spongy area along the ventral tail, lacking the enclosed pouch of seahorses. This patch, roughly 10 centimeters long in adults, comprises thickened epidermis riddled with blood vessels. Cup-like depressions form to cradle each egg. Adhesion is immediate, facilitated by a sticky mucus. Fertilization occurs externally, sperm released simultaneously, embedding the embryos firmly. The male then assumes sole responsibility. His skin proliferates over the eggs, providing a semi-protective layer. Capillaries deliver oxygen, nutrients, and perhaps immunological factors, while regulating osmotic balance against fluctuating salinities in coastal waters. Incubation spans 4 to 8 weeks, temperature-dependent, cooler waters prolonging the period. The male continues foraging, though mobility reduces slightly. Energy allocation shifts toward paternal care. Embryos develop visibly, eye spots appearing, yolk sacs diminishing. The brood patch darkens, eggs turning yellowish as they mature. Risks include fouling by algae or parasites, which the male counters by periodic flexing, or seeking cleaner currents. Predation remains low, the camouflaged form deterring most threats. Though curious fish may investigate, hatching is staggered. Over days, the male contracts his tail, expelling tiny, fully formed juveniles. each around 20 millimeters long, resembling miniature adults with nascent leafy protrusions. No larval stage. Independence immediate. Juveniles disperse passively, carried by currents. Though many remain near parental sites, initial survival hinges on avoiding planktivores. Growth is steady, first year adding 10 to 15 centimeters, diet mirroring adults but scaled down to even tinier copepods and rotifers. Mortality peaks early. Estimates suggest less than 10% reach maturity. Predation, starvation, and dispersal to unsuitable habitats claiming most. Those that thrive exhibit rapid appendage elaboration. By 6 months, lobes approach adult complexity, sexual maturity at 24 to 30 months, lifespan averages 5 to 7 years, though captive individuals have exceeded 10. Reproductive output varies, females producing 1 to 2 broods per season, males incubating once, polyandry and polygyny observed, though serial monogamy predominates in low-density populations. The life cycle, therefore, loops through deception, patience, and paternal investment, a strategy honed by evolution to maximize offspring in a stable yet unpredictable environment. Disruptions, like habitat loss, skew demographics, reducing recruitment. The male pregnancy, iconic and efficient, underscores the leafy sea dragon's place in nature's gallery of reproductive wonders. The leafy sea dragon's diet reflects its sedentary, camouflaged lifestyle, a specialist in small, planktonic crustaceans. It consumes thousands of tiny prey daily to fuel its low metabolism existence. Primary targets include mysid shrimp, often called opossum shrimp for their brood pouches. Species like Tenegomasis australiensis and Anasomasis mixta australis dominate, swarming in dense aggregations near kelp. These 2 to 5 millimeter crustaceans provide high-energy lipids, essential for growth and reproduction. Amphipods, copepods, and larval decapods supplement. Occasional polychaete worms or fish larvae add variety, but mysids comprise over 80% of intake, quantified through gut content analyses and stable isotope studies. Feeding strategy is ambush-oriented. The sea dragon positions in current-swept channels, where prey drifts past. Eyes swivel independently, detecting movement against the dappled backdrop. Strike range limited to snout length, around 5 centimeters. But accuracy nears perfect for aligned targets. The tubular mouth protrudes rapidly, hyoid bone depressing, creating suction vacuum. Prey engulfed whole, no chewing. Digestion rapid in the straight gut. Enzymes breaking down exoskeletons efficiently. Feeding frequency peaks at crepuscular hours, when mysid activity heightens. Daily consumption estimates, based on captive observations, suggest adults ingest up to 2,000 items, equating to 5 to 10% body weight. Juveniles require proportionally more, scaling with higher metabolic rates. Foraging behavior integrates with crypsis. Minimal movement conserves energy, while maximizing encounters. In prey-scarce periods, like winter slack tides, the sea dragon may relocate slightly, but never pursues actively. Starvation tolerance is moderate. lipid reserves in the liver buffering short deficits, isotopic signatures. From carbon and nitrogen analyses, confirm a low trophic position, primary consumers, reflecting the planktonic focus, microbiome studies, via 16S rRNA sequencing, reveal gut bacteria aiding chitin degradation, enhancing nutrient extraction from crustacean-heavy diets. Threats to food webs amplify vulnerability. Eutrophication from coastal runoff promotes algal blooms, disrupting mysid populations. Climate-driven shifts. Warmer waters favoring different zooplankton assemblages, potentially decoupling the sea dragon from its staples. Invasive species, like the European green crab, compete for or prey on mysids. Indirect effects cascade. The feeding ecology, precise and efficient, ties the species inexorably to the health of temperate plankton communities. The leafy sea dragon did not appear fully formed. Its extravagant morphology represents the culmination of millions of years of incremental evolutionary tinkering within the cygnothid family, a group that itself diverged from other pipefish-like ancestors during the early Paleogene, perhaps around 50 to 60 million years ago, when global cooling and the expansion of seagrass meadows created new niches for cryptic, slow-moving herbivores and planktivores. Molecular clock estimates, calibrated with fossil cygnotids from the Eocene of Monte Balca, place the split between the seahorse lineage and the broader pipefish sea dragon clade somewhere in the Oligocene, 25 to 35 million years ago. The leafy and weedy sea dragons, though superficially similar, represent separate radiations, phylogenetic reconstructions using mitochondrial cytochrome B, nuclear markers, and more recently whole genome data show Phycodurus equus and Philipteryx teneolatus diverging perhaps 10 to 15 million years ago, during Miocene fluctuations in sea level that repeatedly isolated and reconnected southern Australian shelf habitats. This timing coincides with the intensification of the Antarctic circumpolar current, which strengthened upwelling along southern Australia, boosting primary productivity, expanding kelp forests, and favoring species capable of exploiting the structural complexity of macroalgae. The leafy sea dragon's lineage, likely originating from a more conventional pipefish-like ancestor, underwent rapid morphological evolution, accelerating in genes associated with dermal appendage development, pigmentation, and skeletal armor. Comparative genomics, drawing on chromosome-level assemblies published in the early 2020s, reveal that the leafy sea dragon genome is unusually large for a teleost, approaching 1.8 gigabases, bloated by massive expansions of repetitive elements, particularly long terminal repeat retrotransposons. These mobile elements, comprising over 40% of the genome, show recent bursts of activity, their insertions near regulatory regions potentially driving cis-regulatory evolution, small changes in enhancer activity, amplified by transposon-mediated shuffling, may have co-opted existing fin and skin developmental pathways to produce the elaborate leafy protrusions. Key developmental genes, including members of the Hox clusters, FGF signaling pathways, and WNT/beta-catenin cascades, exhibit signatures of positive selection and elevated expression in appendage primordia. Transcriptomic profiling of embryonic, juvenile, and adult stages demonstrates that the leafy structures arise as integumentary outgrowths, not modified fin rays, but novel skin folds vascularized early in ontogeny. This innovation parallels convergent evolution in other cryptic marine taxa, such as the leafy sea dragon's distant relative the sargassum pipefish or even terrestrial chameleons, yet achieved through entirely different genetic routes. Immune gene families, particularly toll-like receptors and complement components, show expansion and diversification in the leafy appendages, perhaps as a defense against epibiont fouling in the nutrient-rich, bacteria-laden kelp zone. Olfactory receptor gene repertoire, strikingly contracted, with fewer than 100 functional OR genes, compared to several hundred in most teleosts, reflects reduced reliance on chemosensation. A life governed by vision in a structurally complex, visually dominant habitat, color vision genes, including multiple cone opsins, remain intact, supporting fine discrimination of algal hues and conspecific signals. Population genomic scans, using thousands of ultra-conserved elements and restriction site-associated DNA sequencing, uncover low overall nucleotide diversity, consistent with historical bottlenecks. Likely during Pleistocene glacial maxima when shelf habitat contracted, yet structured into distinct clusters, western, central, and eastern, with FSD values indicating limited contemporary gene flow, effective population sizes estimated in the low thousands for some subpopulations, underscoring fragility to local perturbations. Hybridization with the weedy sea dragon, though morphologically improbable, has been molecularly excluded. No introgression detected, reinforcing species-level separation. Ancient introgression from extinct cyngnithid lineages remains a tantalizing possibility, hinted at by discordant gene trees in mitochondrial versus nuclear markers. The evolutionary trajectory, therefore, traces a path from generalized pipefish through increasing crypsis to extreme specialization, the leafy form, a product of relaxed constraints on energy budgets in stable habitats, coupled with intense selection for invisibility, a living seaweed illusion, sculpted by transposons, regulatory evolution, and the quiet persistence of temperate reef ecosystems. The leafy sea dragon occupies a precarious position, listed as near threatened on the IUCN Red List since 2006, with reassessments in 2017 and beyond maintaining that status, though some regional subpopulations edge toward vulnerable. No precise global population estimate exists. Citizen science databases, accumulating tens of thousands of georeferenced sightings since the early 2000s, provide the best proxy, revealing stable trends in core South Australian sites, gradual declines along the western and eastern range edges, and sporadic local disappearances following heat waves or habitat degradation. Density in pristine habitats, historically measured at 50 to 100 individuals per hectare, now often falls below 20 in impacted zones. Primary threats cluster around habitat quality. The Great Southern Reef, despite its scale, suffers progressive fragmentation. Marine heat waves, amplified by anthropogenic climate change, have become the dominant driver. The unprecedented 2010-2011 Ningaloo Great Australian Bight marine heat wave, followed by 2015, 2016, and 2018-2019 events, caused widespread Ecklonia mortality. Canopy cover plummeted 30 to 90% in some areas, replaced by turf-forming algae or urchin barrens, leafy sea dragons, dependent on intact mid-water macroalgal structure for crypsis and prey delivery, suffered direct displacement, reduced foraging success, and elevated predation risk. Thermal performance models, integrating metabolic scope, feeding rate, and egg development, predict sharp declines in reproductive output above 21 degrees Celsius, a threshold increasingly exceeded during summer anomalies. Secondary pressures compound the issue: coastal development, port deepening, breakwater construction, and desalination outfalls introduce chronic sedimentation, heavy metals, and hypersalinity plumes. Agricultural runoff, though moderated by recent drought, historically delivered nutrient pulses, triggering harmful algal blooms that deplete oxygen and alter zooplankton communities. Invasive species, notably the range-expanding sea urchin Centrostephanus rajasa, create grazing fronts that denude kelp, converting three-dimensional habitat to two-dimensional barrens. Bycatch in nearshore nets, though infrequent, claims individuals, particularly during winter aggregations. Historically, targeted collection for the aquarium trade posed a significant risk. Leafies, prized for their ethereal appearance, fetched high prices. Illegal harvesting, especially in the 1990s and early 2000s, depleted accessible populations. Strict permitting, export bans, and enforcement since the mid-2000s have largely curtailed this pressure. Captive breeding, successful for weedy sea dragons, remains technically challenging for leafies due to precise temperature control, live mycid supply, and susceptibility to bacterial infections. Yet progress in several Australian facilities offers hope for future supplementation or reintroduction. Conservation responses build on multiple fronts. Marine protected areas, now covering roughly 30% of South Australia's coastal waters, provide core refugia. No-take zones in Encounter Bay, Upper Spencer Gulf, and the investigator group show higher sighting rates. Habitat restoration trials, transplanting kelp, controlling urchins, and creating artificial structures remain experimental. Climate mitigation, though global in scope, directly influences trajectory. Citizen science, through platforms like iNaturalist, Reef Life Survey, and the dedicated Leafy Sea Dragon Watch continues to generate high-resolution data, informing adaptive management, public engagement, aided by the species' charismatic status. South Australia's marine emblem since 2001 drives awareness, yet the leafy sea dragon's future, like that of the swaying forests it inhabits, hangs on whether humanity can slow the warming, curb coastal pressures, and allow temperate reefs the resilience to adapt. The leafy sea dragon occupies a unique place in the human imagination, not as a fierce predator or a swift swimmer, but as a quiet, almost otherworldly apparition, drifting through the kelp like a living piece of the ocean's dream. In indigenous Australian coastal cultures, particularly among the Ngarrindjeri people of the Lower Murray and Coorong, the Fleurieu Peninsula, and Kangaroo Island, oral traditions speak of sea spirits, water beings, and creatures that blur the line between plant and animal. While no single dreaming story centers exclusively on the leafy sea dragon, elders have described seeing these forms as part of the broader tapestry of sea country, signs of healthy kelp beds, indicators of balanced waters, or even gentle guardians that move with the tides, their presence linked to seasonal abundance, the arrival of fish runs, the renewal of seagrass. Such knowledge, passed through songlines and ceremonial practice, embeds the species within a worldview where every element of the environment carries meaning, responsibility, and connection. European arrival disrupted these relationships. Early settlers and sealers, encountering the strange leafy forms in nets or washed ashore, often regarded them as curiosities, botanical anomalies, or even hoaxes. Whalers in the 19th century occasionally preserved dried specimens, sending them back to Europe where they joined cabinets of wonder alongside narwhal tusks and platypus skins. The formal scientific description by Albert Gunther in 1865, and subsequent illustrations in natural history volumes, began to shift perception from oddity to marvel. Yet it was the 20th century, with the rise of underwater photography, color film, and popular natural history media, that transformed the leafy sea dragon into a cultural icon. Jacques Cousteau's teams, filming in southern Australian waters during the 1960s and 1970s, captured some of the earliest moving images. Their slow, hypnotic drifts narrated in reverent tones introduced the species to global audiences. National Geographic features, BBC documentaries, and later, IMAX films, presented the leafy sea dragon as a flagship of temperate marine biodiversity, a counterpoint to the more familiar tropical coral reef spectacles. Its ethereal appearance, delicate appendages catching light, lent itself perfectly to poetic framing. A floating leaf with eyes, the ocean's living lace. Nature's masterpiece of disguise, phrases that recur across decades of popular writing. In Australia itself, the leafy sea dragon achieved official recognition in 2001, when it was declared the marine emblem of South Australia, a choice reflecting both its regional endemism and its charismatic appeal. The emblem appears on government publications, tourism materials, educational resources, and even some municipal flags, schools in Adelaide, Victor Harbor, and Kangaroo Island incorporate leafy sea dragon studies into marine biology curricula. Children's books feature it as a gentle protagonist, often anthropomorphized as shy, wise, or magical. This gentle persona contrasts with more aggressive marine icons, such as sharks or orcas, allowing the species to serve as an ambassador for subtlety, patience, and the beauty of less conspicuous ecosystems. Human interactions extend beyond symbolism into direct engagement. Recreational diving, particularly in South Australia, has grown around leafy hotspots. Sites like Rapid Bay Jetty, the Aldinga Reef, and the northern Kangaroo Island coast draw thousands of certified divers annually, many equipped with macro lenses to photograph the animals at close range. Responsible dive operators emphasize buoyancy control, no touching, and limited flash usage to minimize stress. Yet the cumulative effect of frequent human presence, bubbles, lights, and inadvertent fin sweeps can alter behavior, pushing individuals into deeper or less optimal microhabitats. Citizen science initiatives, such as the Leafy Sea Dragon Watch program, harness this enthusiasm productively, training volunteers to log sightings, measure size, note appendage condition, and photograph for individual identification. These data feed directly into population monitoring, helping detect trends that formal surveys might miss. The aquarium trade, once a significant pressure, has largely transitioned to ethical sourcing. Strict Australian export controls, combined with improved husbandry techniques, mean that most leafies now seen in public aquaria are captive bred or part of managed display programs. Facilities in Sydney, Melbourne, and internationally collaborate on breeding protocols, sharing knowledge of temperature regimes, live food cultures, and disease prevention. These efforts, while not yet producing large-scale releases, serve dual roles: education and research. Visitors encountering a leafy sea dragon in a carefully lit tank often leave with heightened appreciation for temperate reefs and a greater willingness to support marine protected areas. Artistic representations proliferate. Underwater photographers compete in annual contests, their images of leafies drifting amid golden kelp winning prizes and gracing calendars, postcards, and fine art prints. Sculptors, jewelers, and tattoo artists draw inspiration, creating stylized versions with flowing lines and iridescent inlays. In literature, the species appears in poetry, eco-fiction, and even speculative narratives imagining future oceans where leafies adapt or vanish. This cultural permeation, from indigenous recognition to global meme, underscores the leafy sea dragon's power as a connector, linking people to place, science to wonder, and policy to emotion. The leafy sea dragon, across its full arc of existence, embodies a rare convergence of evolutionary ingenuity, ecological dependence, and cultural resonance. Its body, a lattice of skin lobes and bony rings; its life, a slow ballet of crypsis and paternal care; its habitat, the swaying cathedrals of the Great Southern Reef, together form a system exquisitely tuned to stability, yet profoundly sensitive to change. The same traits that allowed it to thrive for millions of years: low dispersal, narrow thermal tolerance, site fidelity, precise microhabitat requirements, now render it vulnerable in an era of accelerating disruption. Climate change stands as the paramount threat. Marine heat waves, no longer rare anomalies, have already triggered kelp canopy collapse across swathes of the range, pushing the distribution poleward, compressing suitable habitat, and decoupling the species from its planktonic prey base. Models projecting to 2050 and beyond, under moderate to high emission scenarios, forecast substantial range contraction, particularly in the northern and eastern sectors, with core South Australian populations persisting longest. Yet even there, summer temperature maxima increasingly exceed performance thresholds, reducing reproductive success, elevating juvenile mortality, and eroding population resilience. Compounding pressures, coastal intensification, invasive species advance, sediment plumes, nutrient shifts, and localized overexploitation, though diminished, continue to erode habitat quality. Protected areas, while valuable, cover only a fraction of the historical range and cannot halt ocean warming. Restoration efforts, urchin culling, kelp receding, artificial reef deployment show promise at small scales. Yet scaling them to match the speed and scope of decline remains daunting. Hope resides in multiple domains. Aggressive global emissions reduction, if achieved, could moderate warming, preserving more of the kelp refuge. Expanded marine protection, strategically placed to encompass climate refugia, could safeguard the most resilient subpopulations. Advances in captive propagation, if scaled, might one day support genetic rescue or reintroduction. Citizen science, already powerful, could grow into a continent-wide monitoring network, providing early warning of declines, informing adaptive management, and sustaining public engagement. The leafy sea dragon's future, therefore, is not predetermined. It is contingent on choices made now, choices about carbon, about coastal planning, about how much we value the quiet wonders of temperate seas. If we act decisively, the drifting illusion may persist. Leafy appendages still catching the filtered light, males still cradling broods, the species still teaching us that survival can be subtle, patient, and breathtakingly beautiful. If we falter, the swaying forests may thin, the ghosts among the kelp may fade, and one of evolution's most poetic creations may become a memory, preserved only in photographs, aquaria, and the stories we tell of what once was. The leafy sea dragon, in the end, is more than a fish. It is a mirror, reflecting both the ingenuity of life and the fragility of the conditions that sustain it. May its slow drift continue through whatever waters remain. The leafy sea dragon navigates its swaying realm not through bold exploration but through exquisite sensitivity to the subtlest cues. Its sensory apparatus finely tuned to a life where being overlooked is the primary strategy. Vision dominates, the eyes large, positioned high and laterally on the head, granting an almost panoramic field. Each eye moves independently, scanning different sectors of the watery space, tracking the erratic dart of a mysid shrimp against the shifting backdrop of kelp blades, while simultaneously monitoring for the slow glide of a potential predator. The retina contains multiple cone types, including those sensitive to ultraviolet and blue-green wavelengths, allowing discrimination of fine tonal gradients in the dappled light that penetrates the canopy. This chromatic acuity helps distinguish living algal tissue from the animal's own leafy appendages, and perhaps even to assess the health or receptivity of a potential mate through subtle hue shifts. Depth perception, though limited by the lateral placement, is augmented by parallax from independent eye movements and by monocular cues such as motion, size gradients, and the relative displacement of objects against the background. The sea dragon does not rely on stereopsis in the mammalian sense, yet compensates with remarkable precision in judging strike distance. Experiments in controlled aquaria demonstrate that individuals can accurately target prey items at ranges of 2 to 6 centimeters, adjusting snout extension and suction timing with millisecond-level refinement. Visual acuity peaks in low to moderate light, matching the crepuscular feeding windows when contrast between prey and background is highest. Chemoreception, by contrast, appears greatly reduced, the olfactory epithelium small, nasal sac simple, and the number of functional olfactory receptor genes markedly lower than in most teleosts. This contraction likely reflects an evolutionary trade-off. In a habitat where chemical gradients are constantly disrupted by currents, and where visual deception is paramount. Olfaction serves mainly for coarse detection of conspecifics during breeding, or perhaps for avoiding fouled water. Gustation, taste buds scattered along the oral cavity and pharynx, evaluates captured prey, though rejection is rare given the narrow dietary spectrum. Mechanoreception, through the lateral line system, is well developed. Neuromasts arranged in prominent supraorbital, infraorbital, and trunk lines detect water displacements as small as a few micrometers, allowing the animal to sense approaching predators, conspecific movements, or the gentle pull of tidal flow, even when visually obscured. The system is particularly sensitive to low-frequency vibrations, such as those produced by distant wave action or the fin beats of nearby fish. This passive hearing complements vision, creating a multimodal awareness that remains effective even in turbid conditions following storms. Touch, mediated by free nerve endings in the skin and leafy appendages, provides feedback on contact with algae, sand, or occasional debris. Though the appendages themselves lack specialized tactile organs, they are richly innervated, contributing to a general somatosensory map. Pain reception, though poorly studied, appears present, as individuals withdraw from strong mechanical disturbance. The overall sensory profile, therefore, prioritizes visual precision, augmented by hydrodynamic awareness, while de-emphasizing chemical cues. a perceptual architecture perfectly matched to a world where sight reveals prey, stillness conceals danger, and the constant undulation of kelp masks both hunter and hunted. Beneath the elaborate disguise, the leafy sea dragon maintains a physiology built around extreme energy conservation. Metabolic rate among the lowest recorded for any teleost of comparable size. Resting oxygen consumption, measured in flow through respirometers, falls between 1/10 and 1/5 that of similarly sized active fishes. This hypometabolism allows survival on sparse, intermittent meals, and supports prolonged fasting during winter when prey densities drop. Cardiac output remains modest. Heart rate typically 20 to 40 beats per minute, even during activity. Blood oxygen carrying capacity is enhanced by relatively high hematocrit and hemoglobin affinity tuned to the moderate oxygen levels of temperate coastal waters. Thermoregulation is entirely behavioral. The species lacks any capacity for metabolic heat production. Preferred temperature range tightly constrained between 13 and 19 degrees Celsius, with critical thermal maxima around 24 to 25 degrees. Performance curves for feeding, swimming, and embryonic development all peak narrowly, explaining the sharp vulnerability to marine heat waves. Osmoregulation, while competent in the narrow salinity range of open coast habitats, becomes stressed in hypersaline pockets of enclosed gulfs during drought, or in low salinity plumes following heavy rainfall. Ionocytes in the gill epithelium handle these fluctuations, though chronic exposure reduces scope for other physiological processes. Digestion proceeds slowly. Gastric evacuation times exceeding 24 hours for small crustacean meals. Enzymatic activity favoring chitinase and protease suites adapted to exoskeleton-rich prey. Gut transit slow, maximizing nutrient extraction. Liver serves as the primary lipid storage organ, visible as a yellowish mass in dissected specimens. These reserves buffer against seasonal scarcity, particularly important for males during brooding, when feeding efficiency declines. Immune function, while understudied, appears adequate for the low pathogen environment, yet the exposed brood patch represents a potential vulnerability, countered by antimicrobial peptides and rapid epidermal turnover. Locomotor physiology reflects the trade-off between camouflage and mobility. Pectoral fin musculature highly aerobic, rich in mitochondria, supporting sustained low-amplitude oscillations, yet anaerobic capacity limited, precluding escape bursts. Tail musculature reduced, consistent with the non-prehensile, rudder-like role. The entire metabolic architecture, therefore, prioritizes endurance over speed, efficiency over power, patience over haste. A physiology that makes the leafy sea dragon not merely a master of disguise, but a paragon of living slowly in a world of constant motion. The leafy sea dragon rarely engages in direct confrontation. Its ecological role is that of quiet consumer and passive participant, embedded within a complex food web where it occupies a low to mid-trophic position. Primary interactions revolve around predation pressure, which remains remarkably low for adults, Larger predatory fish, such as yellowtail kingfish, snapper, or bronze whaler sharks, occasionally take juveniles, but the armored body, tough skin, and unpalatable texture deter most attacks. Cryptic coloration ensures that even curious predators often pass without striking. Recorded predation events are scarce, mostly opportunistic, by birds such as cormorants or terns. When individuals drift too close to the surface during storms, prey relationships are far more intimate. Dependence on mysid shrimp aggregations creates a tight link to the planktonic community. Fluctuations in mysid abundance, driven by phytoplankton blooms, upwelling pulses, or predator cycles, directly influence leafy condition and reproduction. No evidence of significant competition with other planktivores. The sea dragon's slow feeding rate and precise targeting occupy a niche distinct from schooling baitfish or active hunters. Commensal relationships appear minimal, though occasional cleaner shrimp or juvenile fish have been observed perching briefly on larger individuals, likely coincidental rather than mutualistic. Parasite load is light. External copepods and isopods occasionally attach to the leafy appendages. Yet heavy infestations are rare, perhaps due to frequent skin sloughing or behavioral selection of cleaner currents. Internal parasites, including digeneans and nematodes, recorded in low prevalence, suggesting effective immune surveillance. No major disease outbreaks documented in wild populations, though bacterial infections, particularly Vibrio spp, pose risks in captivity, highlighting the delicate balance of the species' microbial environment. Epibionte communities on the appendages, while a potential fouling threat, are kept in check by the animal's slow movement through abrasive algal surfaces and by possible chemical defenses in the skin mucus. The leafy sea dragon, therefore, drifts through a web of subtle dependencies, rarely the aggressor, seldom the victim, a quiet node whose persistence signals the health of the broader temperate reef assemblage. Life for the leafy sea dragon follows the seasonal cadence of the Great Southern Reef, a predictable yet variable rhythm shaped by temperature, light, nutrient pulses, and current strength. Winter, June to August, brings cooler waters, stronger westerlies, and enhanced upwelling. Kelp growth accelerates. Mysid swarms concentrate in sheltered embayments, and adult leafies aggregate in slightly shallower zones. Feeding intensifies, lipid reserves accumulate, preparing for the energy demands of reproduction. Activity levels rise modestly, with individuals making more frequent short-range movements to exploit prey patches. Spring, September to November, marks the onset of courtship. Water temperatures climb, day length increases, and females begin ovarian maturation. Breeding pairs form in late spring, egg transfer peaking in October-November. Males then enter the brooding phase, reducing activity, selecting sheltered positions. Females, post-deposition, resume intensive feeding to replenish reserves. Juveniles from the previous season grow rapidly, appendages elaborating, mobility increasing. Summer, December to February, presents the greatest physiological challenge. Surface waters warm, stratification intensifies and prey may become patchier. Brooding males release young, which immediately face high mortality in the plankton-rich but predator-dense shallows. Adults disperse slightly, seeking cooler microhabitats. Feeding rates decline if temperatures exceed 20 degrees. Autumn, March to May, sees a gradual cooling, return of upwelling, and recovery of condition. Juveniles reach their first winter. Mortality remains high, but survivors begin to show adult-like crypsis, phenological shifts, already observed in citizen science records, indicate earlier breeding in warmer years, compressed brooding periods, and range edge disappearances during prolonged heat. These cycles, finely tuned over millennia, now face desynchronization as warming accelerates, upwelling weakens, and extreme events proliferate. The leafy sea dragon's seasonal life, therefore, serves as a sensitive indicator, its timing, abundance, and condition reflecting the pulse of an entire ecosystem within the cyngnithid family. The leafy sea dragon stands in instructive contrast to its closest relative, the weedy sea dragon, and to the more familiar seahorses. While both Australian sea dragons share male pregnancy, exposed brood patches, and kelp-associated crypsis, the leafy form represents the more extreme specialization, appendages far more elaborate and numerous, body armor more rigid, swimming even less efficient, genetic divergence, estimated at 10 to 15 million years, has produced two parallel solutions to the same ecological challenge. The weedy sea dragon, with its simpler, branching, weed-like protrusions, achieves effective camouflage with less morphological cost and exhibits greater mobility, larger home ranges, and higher population densities in many shared sites. Seahorses, particularly tropical species, diverge sharply in closed brood pouches. Prehensile tails, upright posture, and stronger swimming ability reflect adaptation to seagrass, mangrove, or coral habitats, where grasping substrates and rapid repositioning confer advantage. Male pregnancy in seahorses includes placental-like nutrient transfer, absent in sea dragons, where the exposed patch provides primarily oxygen and protection. These differences highlight divergent evolutionary trajectories. Sea dragons toward maximal crypsis in open water kelp, seahorses toward substrate association and maneuverability. Other pipefishes, the presumed ancestral stock, lack elaborate appendages, relying on slender bodies and color matching. The leafy sea dragon, therefore, represents one endpoint of cyngnithid morphological radiation, the pinnacle of dermal innovation, achieved at the expense of dispersal, speed, and thermal breadth. Comparative studies integrating morphology, physiology, and phylogenomics illuminate how similar selective pressures, crypsis, planktivory, male care, can yield dramatically different solutions depending on habitat structure, current regime, and predation context. Scientific inquiry into the leafy sea dragon confronts a fundamental difficulty. The subject itself refuses to be conspicuous. Direct observation requires prolonged immersion in cold, often surge-swept waters, where visibility can drop to a few meters after storms. Early studies relied on serendipitous encounters, diver logs, and beach-washed specimens. Modern approaches combine multiple non-invasive techniques, underwater visual census along fixed transects. Though biased toward detectable individuals, provides baseline density estimates, roving diver surveys, covering larger areas, capture broader distribution patterns, acoustic telemetry, using small, externally attached tags, has revealed greater mobility than previously assumed, with some individuals traveling kilometers over months, yet returning to core sites. Mark recapture via photo identification. Leveraging unique appendage patterns and spot configurations allows individual tracking, survival estimation, and breeding site fidelity assessment. Citizen science platforms aggregating diver-submitted photographs have generated the largest sighting database, though subject to spatial and seasonal bias. Genomic sampling through fin clip biopsies has yielded population structure, diversity, and selection signatures without requiring lethal collection. Captive studies, conducted in specialized aquaria, provide controlled data on physiology, reproduction, and husbandry requirements, yet extrapolation to wild conditions remains cautious. The greatest challenge: integrating these data into predictive models, forecasting population trajectories under climate scenarios, requires bridging scales. From individual metabolism to ecosystem kelp dynamics, despite progress, fundamental gaps persist. No robust range-wide abundance estimate, limited understanding of juvenile dispersal and survival, sparse information on disease ecology, and virtually no long-term demographic monitoring outside a few sites. Overcoming these requires sustained funding, cross-disciplinary collaboration, and continued engagement of the diving community. The leafy sea dragon, master of evasion, continues to challenge the very methods designed to reveal its secrets. Of all pressures facing the leafy sea dragon, ocean warming stands as the most pervasive and irreversible. The Great Southern Reef has already experienced multiple extreme marine heat waves, each stripping kelp canopy, altering community structure, and shifting species distributions. Physiological studies show narrow thermal performance windows, with feeding, reproduction, and larval survival all declining sharply above 21 to 22 degrees Celsius. Brooding males, in particular, face compounded stress, elevated metabolic demand, reduced prey availability, and increased pathogen risk in warmer water. Kelp loss cascades directly. Eclonia radiata, the primary structural species, suffers tissue bleaching, meristem mortality, and reduced recruitment following heat stress. Canopy cover declines, mid-water habitat compresses, prey aggregations disperse, and crypsis fails as background complexity diminishes. Poleward range shifts, already documented in associated species, are constrained for the leafy sea dragon by poor dispersal ability, leading to range contraction rather than simple relocation. Northern and eastern populations, closest to thermal limits, show the steepest declines, while core South Australian sites persist longer. Yet even there, increasing frequency of summer anomalies erodes resilience, compounded by ocean acidification, which may impair calcification of bony armor, and by deoxygenation in stratified waters. Warming creates a multi-stressor environment. Synergistic effects amplify mortality, reduce reproductive output, and skew sex ratios through differential thermal sensitivity. Projections under RCP-45 and RCP-85 scenarios forecast 30 to 70% habitat loss by 2050, with near total extirpation in northern sectors. The leafy sea dragon, therefore, functions as a sentinel, its trajectory foreshadowing broader temperate reef collapse unless warming is curtailed. The leafy sea dragon's ethereal form possesses unmatched educational potential. Its appearance alone captivates, drawing learners into discussions of evolution, ecology, camouflage, and conservation. Aquaria worldwide feature interpretive displays, often with live animals, accompanied by panels explaining male pregnancy, kelp dependence, and climate threats. School programs in South Australia incorporate field trips, snorkeling surveys, and classroom rearing of mysids to simulate the food web. These experiences foster ocean literacy, linking personal observation to global issues. Digital outreach amplifies reach. Virtual dives, 360-degree videos, and augmented reality apps allow users to meet leafies without entering the water. Social media campaigns, timed to breeding season, share real-time sightings, encouraging public reporting. Documentaries, podcasts, and illustrated books target diverse audiences, from children to policymakers, emphasizing the species as a flagship for temperate marine protection. Citizen science platforms double as educational tools. Participants learn species identification, data collection protocols, and basic statistics while contributing meaningful records. Challenges remain. Ensuring messages avoid oversimplification, balancing wonder with urgency, and countering aquarium washing, where captive displays create false security about wild status. Yet the leafy sea dragon's charisma, gentle nature, and visible vulnerability make it an ideal vehicle for fostering stewardship, inspiring actions from reducing carbon footprints to supporting marine parks. Through education, the species transcends biology, becoming a symbol of what we stand to lose and what we might yet save. The leafy sea dragon generates measurable economic benefits, primarily through nature-based tourism. Dive tourism in South Australia, particularly around Fleurieu Peninsula, Kangaroo Island, and the Eyre Peninsula, draws thousands of visitors annually, many specifically seeking leafy sightings. Expenditure on accommodation, equipment rental, guide fees, and associated services contributes millions to local economies. Indirect benefits flow to restaurants, transport, and retail, creating employment in coastal communities. Photography and film production add value. Professional underwater cinematographers, stock image contributors, and documentary crews invest in the region, while scientific research, though modest in funding, supports jobs in marine biology, data analysis, and environmental consulting. The species' status as South Australia's marine emblem enhances brand value, appearing in tourism marketing, government promotions, and merchandise, generating additional revenue streams. Non-market valuation studies, using contingent valuation or choice experiments, estimate high existence and bequest values. Members of the public, even those who never visit, express willingness to pay for protection, reflecting cultural and intrinsic worth. Balancing these benefits against potential costs, such as dive site overcrowding or anchor damage, requires careful management, zoning, operator certification, and carrying capacity limits when managed sustainably. The leafy sea dragon proves that wonder can be economically productive, supporting conservation through appreciation rather than extraction. In the slow drift of the leafy sea dragon, we encounter lessons that reach far beyond ichthyology. It teaches patience, demonstrating that survival need not be loud or fast. That stillness, properly perfected, can be the most potent strategy. It teaches humility, reminding us that nature crafts solutions far subtler and more elegant than human engineering. Its male pregnancy challenges assumptions about gender roles in care. Its camouflage questions the boundary between self and environment. Its dependence on kelp underscores interconnectedness, showing that no species exists in isolation. The leafy sea dragon also teaches urgency. Its fragility in the face of rapid change mirrors the vulnerability of many quiet ecosystems. Temperate reefs, unlike their tropical counterparts, have received less attention, less funding, less protection. Yet they harbor extraordinary biodiversity, store vast carbon, and buffer coastlines. The species' fate, therefore, is not merely a question of one fish, but of how we value the less charismatic, less visible components of life on Earth. If we act, reducing emissions, expanding protection, restoring habitat, engaging communities, the leafy sea dragon may continue its gentle drift, leafy appendages catching light, males cradling broods, a living testament to evolutionary ingenuity. If we fail, its loss will diminish the ocean's repertoire of beauty, leaving a quieter, less wondrous sea. The choice rests with us. May we prove worthy of the lessons this drifting illusion offers, and grant it, and its swaying forest home, the future they have so patiently earned. The leafy sea dragon has long transcended the boundaries of biology to become a recurring motif in human creative expression. Its form, so improbable and delicate, invites artists to explore themes of illusion, fragility, patience, and the blurred line between the living and the inanimate in fine art. Underwater photographers have elevated the species to near iconic status. Images of a single leafy drifting in a shaft of golden light piercing the kelp canopy frequently win international competitions. The play of light through translucent appendages, the soft gradients of yellow-green against deeper emerald tones, the subtle motion blur of fins against still water. These elements create compositions that feel almost painterly. Photographers speak of waiting hours for the precise alignment of animal, light, and background, treating the leafy not as wildlife subject but as collaborator in the creation of ephemeral beauty. Painters and illustrators, working in both realistic and stylized modes, have embraced the creature since the late 19th century. Early natural history plates rendered it with almost heraldic precision, spines exaggerated, lobes flowing like banners. Later 20th century artists, influenced by surrealism, depicted leafies as dreamlike entities, half plant, half myth, floating through abstract seascapes. Contemporary illustrators, especially in children's books and graphic novels, often anthropomorphize the animal, giving it expressive eyes, gentle smiles, and narrative roles as wise wanderer or quiet observer. These depictions reinforce the cultural perception of the leafy as benign, introspective, and slightly magical. In literature, the sea dragon appears more sparingly but memorably, appearing in eco-poetry as a symbol of resilience amid change. One Australian poet described it as a leaf that learned to breathe, a branch that grew eyes to watch the tide turn. In speculative fiction, authors have placed leafies in future oceans, either thriving in restored kelp corridors or vanishing as the last ghosts of a warmer world. Children's literature favors the species heavily. Picture books portray it as a shy friend to young divers, teaching lessons about camouflage, kindness, and the importance of protecting quiet places. These stories often end with calls to action, planting the seed of environmental awareness in young readers. Film and television have amplified its reach. Beyond early Cousteau footage, modern documentaries dedicate entire segments to the leafy, using slow-motion macro cinematography, time-lapse of brooding males, and computer-generated overlays to reveal internal anatomy. Nature series frame it as the hidden jewel of temperate seas, contrasting its subtlety with the flashier inhabitants of coral reefs. Animated features, short films, and even advertising campaigns have borrowed its image. A leafy drifting across the screen often symbolizes serenity, environmental purity, or the delicate balance of nature. Music, though less direct, occasionally draws inspiration. Ambient composers create soundscapes evoking the slow sway of kelp, gentle pulses and sustained tones mirroring the animal's rhythm. Some musicians have titled instrumental pieces after the species, using them as metaphors for graceful persistence. The leafy sea dragon, therefore, functions as cultural muse, its form inviting endless reinterpretation. Each artwork, poem, frame, or note adding another layer to the collective human fascination with this quiet marvel of the sea. Molecular adaptations, the genetic basis of the leafy illusion. Deep within the genome of Phycodurus equus lie the molecular signatures of its extraordinary phenotype. Recent chromosome-level assemblies, published in the early 2020s, have exposed a genome unusually rich in repetitive DNA, transposable elements constituting nearly half the total sequence. These mobile elements, far from mere genomic noise, appear to have played an active role in evolutionary innovation, Bursts of retrotransposon activity, dated to the late Miocene and Pliocene, coincide with the period when leafy-like morphology likely emerged. Insertions near cis-regulatory regions of developmental genes may have altered expression patterns, co-opting existing pathways to produce novel integumentary outgrowths. Genes in the Hoxd cluster, known for patterning appendages in vertebrates, show accelerated evolution and increased expression in appendage primordia. Enhancers upstream of key los exhibit transposon-derived sequences, suggesting that these elements provided raw material for regulatory evolution. BMP and FGF signaling pathways, central to skin and fin development, display signatures of positive selection. Their downstream targets upregulated specifically in the leafy lobes. Transcriptomics confirms that these structures are not modified fins, but independent dermal elaborations, vascularized early, innervated, and capable of limited pigment modulation through melanophores and iridophores. Immune system genes, particularly those encoding antimicrobial peptides and complement factors, are overexpressed in appendage tissue, likely an adaptation to prevent fouling by bacteria, diatoms, and epizoans in the nutrient-rich kelp zone. The major histocompatibility complex shows moderate polymorphism, sufficient for pathogen recognition, yet not so high as to compromise crypsis through excessive odor production. Olfactory receptor genes, by contrast, number fewer than 100 functional copies, a dramatic reduction reflecting diminished reliance on chemosensation. Color vision options remain diverse, supporting fine discrimination of algal hues, crucial for both foraging and mate recognition. Circadian clock genes, while conserved, exhibit tissue-specific expression patterns that align activity peaks with twilight, when prey is most abundant and visibility lowest. These molecular adaptations, taken together, paint a picture of intense, targeted selection, sculpting a genome that prioritizes visual deception, dermal elaboration, and metabolic thrift. The leafy sea dragon, at the genetic level, is a testament to how small regulatory changes, amplified by mobile elements, can produce morphological leaps that appear almost fantastical. Acoustic and hydrodynamic ecology, the silent world of currents. The leafy sea dragon inhabits a soundscape defined more by absence than presence. Its own movements nearly silent, pectoral fins beating at high frequency but low amplitude, producing vibrations too subtle for human hearing, yet detectable by the lateral line system of nearby conspecifics or predators. The animal itself is exquisitely sensitive to water-borne sounds and pressure waves. Neuromasts along the head and trunk respond to particle motion and pressure gradients, allowing it to sense the approach of larger fish, the distant thrum of swell, or even the low-frequency pulses generated by wave breaking on nearby reefs. Hydrodynamic interactions shape daily life. The leafy appendages, while non-propulsive, increase surface area, creating drag that stabilizes position in gentle currents. This passive drift, combined with precise fin adjustments, allows the animal to maintain station in tidal flows without constant effort. In stronger surge, it seeks lee sides of boulders or denser kelp patches, reducing energetic cost. During storms, individuals settle close to the substrate, appendages folded, body angled into the flow, minimizing dislodgement risk. Prey capture itself is hydrodynamic. The rapid mouth protrusion creates a suction field, drawing water and mysids inward. High-speed video reveals vortex rings forming at the mouth margins, concentrating prey, while minimizing disturbance to surrounding water. This precision minimizes energy expenditure, crucial for an animal with such low metabolic scope. The broader acoustic environment of the kelp forest, characterized by snapping shrimp, grazing urchins, and fish vocalizations, likely provides indirect cues. Dense kelp canopies dampen sound transmission, creating quieter microhabitats where leafies concentrate. Changes in this soundscape, through habitat loss or increased boat traffic, could subtly disrupt foraging efficiency or anti-predator awareness. The silent, flow-tuned existence of the leafy sea dragon, therefore, reveals an ecology governed by hydrodynamics and faint vibrations, where noise is minimized, motion economized, and perception tuned to the gentlest disturbances in an otherwise quiet underwater realm. Chapter 24: Juvenile Ecology and Recruitment Dynamics. The vulnerable first year, the moment of release from the male's brood patch, marks the beginning of the leafy's most perilous phase. Tiny juveniles, approximately 20 millimeters long, emerge fully formed, already bearing miniature leafy protrusions. Yet these nascent lobes provide only partial camouflage. They drift immediately into the plankton, carried by currents, with no parental guidance. Yolk reserves sustain them for perhaps 24 to 48 hours, after which they must capture microscopic prey, primarily copepod nauplii, rotifers, and early-stage mysids, smaller than those taken by adults. Survival during this pelagic-like phase is low. Estimates derived from repeated surveys and modeling suggest fewer than 10% reach their first winter. Heavy predation by planktivorous fish, comb jellies, and chedognaths claims many. Others perish from starvation when currents carry them into prey-poor water, or from physical damage when dashed against rocks or sand. Those that settle into suitable microhabitats, shallow sandy patches near kelp, begin a benthic existence. Growth accelerates, appendages elaborate rapidly. By 6 months, most juveniles resemble small adults, though still more translucent and less rigid. Recruitment success varies spatially and temporally. Sites with persistent mysid aggregations and moderate wave exposure show higher juvenile densities. Years following strong upwelling, which boosts zooplankton, produce stronger year classes. Climate variability introduces uncertainty. Marine heat waves that coincide with hatching periods reduce survival, while cooler, productive years enhance it. The lack of a true larval dispersal stage, combined with limited swimming ability, results in strong population structure. Neighboring bays often harbor genetically distinct cohorts, Recruitment failure in one embayment rarely compensated by immigration from elsewhere. The first year, therefore, acts as a bottleneck, filtering the next generation through a gauntlet of predation, starvation, and chance. Understanding and protecting juvenile habitat, particularly transitional zones between sand and kelp, becomes essential for long-term population persistence. Chapter 25. The leafy sea dragon as a bioindicator. Lessons from a sentinel species because of its narrow ecological requirements, strong site fidelity, and conspicuous appearance to trained observers. The leafy sea dragon functions as an excellent bioindicator for the health of temperate Australian reef ecosystems. Changes in sighting frequency, size distribution, reproductive success, or appendage condition can signal broader environmental shifts long before more cryptic species show effects. Citizen science databases, spanning 2 decades, already reveal patterns. Declining encounter rates in northern range edge sites correlate with documented kelp loss. Increased observations of damaged appendages coincide with periods of high sedimentation or algal fouling. Altered breeding phenology tracks rising spring temperatures. The species' low mobility and dependence on intact mid-water macroalgal structure make it particularly sensitive to habitat fragmentation. Localized extirpations often precede wider reef degradation. Its presence or absence in monitoring transects serves as a rapid assessment metric for management effectiveness. Marine protected areas with high leafy densities typically show healthier kelp cover, lower urchin numbers, and more stable mysid populations. Conversely, declines within no-take zones signal issues beyond fishing pressure, such as climate stress or upstream pollution. As a flagship species, the leafy also bridges science and society. Divers who record sightings become invested in outcomes, leading to greater advocacy for reef protection. Educational programs using the leafy as focal organism introduce concepts of bioindication, trophic cascades, and climate resilience. The species, therefore, serves not only as a barometer of ecosystem condition, but as a powerful tool for engaging communities in conservation. Its quiet drift, once overlooked, now carries the weight of an entire reef system story. The challenge of maintaining leafy sea dragons in captivity mirrors the intricacy of their natural existence, requiring precise replication of temperate coastal conditions, from water chemistry to dietary nuances. Early attempts in the mid-20th century often failed. Animals succumbing to bacterial infections, starvation, or stress from inadequate flow. Advances in aquarium technology, including closed-loop systems, protein skimmers, and UV sterilization, have since enabled long-term survival. Public facilities in Adelaide, Sydney, and Melbourne now house breeding groups, while international zoos, such as those in California and Japan, maintain display specimens sourced through ethical channels. Water parameters demand vigilance. Temperature held between 14 and 18 degrees Celsius. Salinity at 35 parts per thousand. pH between 8.0 and 8.3. low nitrates and phosphates to prevent algal overgrowth. Flow must simulate gentle tidal movement, strong enough to keep mysids in suspension, but not so vigorous as to tear delicate appendages. Lighting mimics the dappled kelp canopy. Full-spectrum LEDs on a 12-hour cycle, with dimmer periods for crepuscular activity. Substrates of fine sand and artificial kelp structures provide cover, reducing stress behaviors like erratic swimming or fin clamping. Diet poses the greatest hurdle. Wild leafies consume thousands of live mysids daily. Captive programs culture these crustaceans in dedicated tanks, using phytoplankton feeds like Isocrasis and Tetrasomes, supplemented with Artemia nauplii for juveniles. Enrichment with HUFA oils ensures nutritional completeness. Feeding regimes involve multiple small offerings, mimicking natural foraging. Hand-rearing neonates requires even finer prey, like copepods and rotifers. Survival rates in captivity hover around 50% for the first year, improving with experience. Breeding in captivity remains rare but achievable. Pairs form under controlled conditions. Courtship stimulated by gradual temperature increases. Egg transfer observed in dim lighting. Males incubated in isolation tanks to minimize disturbance. Hatching success varies from 30 to 80%, depending on water quality and male health. Genetic management avoids inbreeding through studbook tracking and inter-institution transfers. These programs, while not yet producing release-ready stock, reduce pressure on wild populations and provide platforms for research on physiology, disease, and climate resilience. The legacy of captive husbandry extends to education. Visitors witnessing a brooding male gain visceral understanding of cyngnithid biology, fostering support for conservation. Yet ethical considerations persist, ensuring that displays do not normalize wild collection, and that welfare standards prioritize animal needs over spectacle. The leafy sea dragon, once untamable, now drifts in glass-walled worlds, a bridge between human curiosity and oceanic mystery. The leafy sea dragon's health reflects the purity of its environment. In the wild, disease incidence is low. The cool, oxygen-rich waters of the Great Southern Reef deterring many pathogens. Yet when stressors accumulate, vulnerabilities emerge. Bacterial infections, particularly Vibrio vulnificus and Aeromonas hydrophila, target stressed individuals, manifesting as reddened appendages, fin rot, or ulcerative skin lesions. Fungal overgrowth, such as Saprolegnia spp, can foul the brood patch, reducing oxygen diffusion to embryos. Parasitic copepods, like Lerniosra branchialis, occasionally attach, causing irritation and secondary infections. Internal parasites, Digenean trematodes and cestodes, infest the gut in low numbers, rarely debilitating, but amplified by poor nutrition. Viral agents remain poorly documented. No major epizootics recorded, though captive outbreaks hint at latent viruses activated by transport stress. Non-infectious ailments include gas bubble disease from supersaturated water or physical trauma from storm surge. Anthropogenic pollutants, heavy metals, pesticides, and microplastics accumulate in tissues, potentially disrupting endocrine function or immune response. Health management in wild populations relies on habitat integrity. Marine parks minimize pollution inputs. Citizen divers report aberrant individuals, providing early warning. In captivity, quarantine protocols, routine microscopy of skin scrapes, and prophylactic treatments with formalin or copper sulfate control outbreaks. Nutritional supplements, including vitamins A and E, bolster resilience. Research into the microbiome, using 16S sequencing, reveals beneficial bacteria aiding digestion and pathogen resistance. Disrupted by antibiotics or poor water quality, climate change exacerbates health risks. Warmer waters favor pathogen proliferation. Marine heat waves correlate with increased lesion prevalence in monitored sites. The leafy sea dragon's health, therefore, serves as a diagnostic for reef vitality. Its subtle ailments signaling larger imbalances. Protecting its well-being demands not just treatment, but prevention through ecosystem stewardship. Early perceptions cast the leafy sea dragon as almost immobile, a passive floater tethered to natal kelp patches. Yet modern tracking technologies have dismantled this view. Ultrasonic telemetry, with tags affixed non-invasively to the dorsal fin, reveals movement spanning hundreds of meters daily and up to several kilometers seasonally. Individuals exhibit strong sight fidelity, returning to core areas after exploratory forays, perhaps guided by geomagnetic cues. Olfactory landmarks, or learned visual features, migration, in the strict sense, does not occur, no mass seasonal relocations, but rather opportunistic displacements driven by food, temperature, or breeding needs. In summer, some drift deeper to avoid warming surface layers. Winter brings concentration in shallower, prey-rich zones. Storm events can displace animals offshore or into adjacent bays, with mixed survival outcomes. Genetic data support limited long-distance dispersal, yet occasional gene flow between clusters suggests rare successful journeys. Juvenile movement remains enigmatic, post-hatch drift passive, currents carrying them tens of kilometers. Settlement bias toward suitable microhabitats. Acoustic arrays deployed in South Australian marine parks capture these patterns, plotting home ranges averaging 50 to 200 square meters, expanding during resource scarcity. The picture emerges of a species more dynamic than static, movements subtle but purposeful, balancing energy conservation with opportunity. As habitats fragment, understanding these patterns becomes critical, informing connectivity models and protected area design. The leafy sea dragon invites philosophical reflection, its mastery of crypsis raising questions about perception, existence, and human intrusion. To observe it is to pierce its veil, disrupting the very deception that defines its being. Ecophilosophers argue for a hands-off ethic, valuing the animal's autonomy over our desire to know. Yet knowledge drives conservation, creating a tension between study and sanctity. Indigenous perspectives, emphasizing relationality, view the leafy not as object but as kin, its presence a sign of reciprocal care for sea country. In bioethics, the species challenges anthropocentric views. Male pregnancy inverts traditional roles, prompting reevaluation of care ethics. Its fragility underscores precautionary principles. Act to prevent harm even in uncertainty. Aesthetic philosophy celebrates its form, a natural artwork evoking wonder, yet commodification through tourism risks reducing it to spectacle. Environmental hermeneutics interprets the leafy as text, its body narrating evolutionary stories, climate lessons, and calls for humility. These perspectives converge on stewardship, observing without harm, knowing without exploitation. The leafy sea dragon, invisible yet profound, teaches that true understanding comes not from capture, but from respectful distance, allowing its drift to continue unmolested. Imagining the leafy sea dragon's trajectory demands speculation. Under optimistic scenarios, aggressive climate mitigation stabilizes temperatures. Kelp forests recover through restoration. Marine networks expand, populations rebound, genetic diversity preserved through assisted migration. The species persists as temperate icon, its range perhaps extending southward with cooling refugia. Pessimistic visions paint extinction risk. Unchecked warming erodes habitat. Tipping points cascade. Kelp barrens dominate. Leafy's contract to isolated pockets, then vanish. Cultural memory lingers in museums, holograms, and lore. Intermediate futures mix resilience and loss. Some subpopulations adapt via standing variation, perhaps evolving enhanced thermal tolerance, while others succumb. Human interventions, like ex situ breeding and reintroduction, play pivotal roles. Speculative biology envisions evolutionary paths. If pressures persist, survivors might develop simpler appendages or shift to novel habitats like artificial reefs. Philosophical futures question whether a saved leafy in a managed ocean retains its essence. These visions, grounded in science yet laced with hope, underscore agency. The leafy sea dragon's tomorrow shaped by today's choices. May it drift onward, a living legacy in waters yet to come.